what we're going to talk about is why are we more prone, and why is it really normal to have anxiety with ADHD? I mean, because what I'll tell you is that it's really prevalent. Who here feels like they have anxiety? Who's got anxiety? It's if you look, it's basically everyone, right? It's everybody for the most part. There might be a couple of us that don't, and it's really, really normal. So just know that. And so what they say is 25 to 50% of ADHD has a co-occurring anxiety disorder. Now they estimate that it might be higher. There's a couple different studies I read that I like that study the most because I'm a nerd. But they also estimate it could be over 50%. So it's really, really common. And if we look at kids, right, 5 to 10% of kids have an anxiety disorder. And when you look at ADHD kids, we're looking up to 35%. So it goes from 5 to 15% to 35% with kids with ADHD. And then it can kind of get, grow as you get older and have all the responsibilities and everything like that. And so with ADHD, it can also get misdiagnosed as anxiety when it's really ADHD. And so I want to show you a couple of really good graphics I liked on the difference between the two, because the other thing when we're looking at anxiety, and some of you know, I also have a mental health background. So I've worked with people with a lot of anxiety and done a lot of therapy as well. When anxiety happens, they can be coming from two different places. So ADHD can be misdiagnosed as anxiety because we can have like this internal chatter that doesn't quiet in our brains, right? And we can't slow down because it's uncomfortable sometimes, or certain things that can happen. Or we're just, we might have anxiety because we have all these things that we weren't able to do because of executive dysfunction, or we feel like we're falling short, or we're overstimulated, right? That can actually be a lot of anxiety. And so we go to the doctor, especially for women, and say this, and you have anxiety, and you give anxiety meds, and it doesn't do it, right? You try to meditate, it makes it worse, like all that stuff. And so and then you treat it as ADHD, and then the anxiety calms, right? And even stimulants can make it better. Whereas general anxiety disorder looks a little bit different. So I want to show you a chart here of the difference between the two. And so you can see here, this is, I love these guys. Neurodivergent Insights is one of my favorite sources for this. And we'll include this in the email out. But you can see, like with ADHD, here's the difference. So ADHD, we're seeking novelty. And by the way, the reason that I'm talking about the difference between the two is when those feelings come up, identifying whether it's the root of ADHD or it's the root of anxiety is going to help you calm that down. Because you're going to treat it differently if it's really the anxiety or the root of the anxiety is ADHD versus the root is like an anxiety disorder. So with ADHD, we're seeking novelty. We want new experiences, right? We might have anxiety associated with our ADHD struggles because we have these amazing gifts, but our world's not necessarily built for ADHD, right? So we might fall short and stuff because the world's not built for us in some ways. And yet we have these amazing gifts. And then attention regulation, we might have trouble focusing, especially when we're, not as interested. And we might have restlessness or just regulating impulses, right? That's ADHD. And then anxiety is going to be excessive worry, like excessive anxiety over certain things. Now, this is different, right? We have what's called rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And this is, you could have excessive worry about having this fear of rejection that actually creates emotional pain, like in our brain because of how our brain's wired. So you might have excessive worry about like being rejected, but it may not be anxiety as root, it might be ADHD, right? So we're not going to take an anxiety pill to calm this fear of rejection down. We're going to recognize it as rejection sensitivity dysphoria and then work through it that way, right? So if you have a lot of anxiety, figuring out where the root is going to help you so much figure out really how to treat it. So disproportionate worry, like way disproportionate to the actual risk or the stressor. With anxiety, you have attention difficulties, right? So we might be preoccupied with thoughts of worry and fear, and they might interfere our ability to focus. And then it causes significant impact. Like maybe you can't leave the house, or you can't do the things you want to do because it's just so overwhelming. You have so much anxiety. And then when we look at this overlap, and no wonder it gets misdiagnosed. Sleep issues, right? Low GABA levels, which is actually tied to anxiety. We get tired really easily or fatigued, which happens with ADHD because we might mask or try to push ourselves to do stuff or overcome procrastination, trouble concentrating. Our memory, our working memory is impacted. So before I did a bunch of trauma work, I literally thought I was getting dementia because my memory was so bad. But when your nervous system is so worked up and you have so much anxiety, you're in survival mode, your brain's not prioritizing little things, it's in survival mode, right? So your memory is impacted because the dopamine and all the juices to keep you safe, even if you are safe, right? Intrusive thoughts. Did you know you could have intrusive thoughts with ADHD? Does anybody have that? Where you're like driving and you're like, oh, what if I drove my car into the tree? Oh my God, that's really scary. Like, why did I think that? What's wrong with me? A lot of us have that and we don't talk about it. So, intrusive thoughts, things that you don't want to happen that scare you, that can happen. And it can be a brain chemical thing. Doesn't mean you're crazy and it doesn't mean you want it to happen. We can get into fight or flight. Gut issues is really common with ADHD, autism, neurodivergence. Very, very common, just so you know. Like almost a lot of us, I don't know the studies, but a lot. Restlessness, tense muscles, if you have that, and then irritability. So do you see how there's so much overlap? And so this is where the self-awareness is going to be really helpful, is where is this anxiety coming from? Is it coming from ADHD? Because we can get anxiety when we're understimulated. Did you know that? So when we're understimulated, which is what our brain does, because it's geared for higher pressure and it's got lower dopamine, if we get understimulated, what happens is our brain says, "Ooh, we're understimulated. This doesn't feel good. Let me come up with these thoughts that create worry and cortisol because it's going to create dopamine. And we need dopamine because that's a happy chemical to help us regulate to keep going with what we need to do." So you could have a bunch of really stressful thoughts that's your ADHD saying, "Oh my gosh, we got to regulate and we're lacking dopamine. So let's come up with thoughts that make us stress, that give us dopamine." Right? Or you could have anxiety too. So it's really interesting because with anxiety, you're going to want to calm it down. You're going to want to calm your nervous system down. Whereas if you're getting ADHD and you're getting all these intrusive thoughts from dopamine, you actually want to help yourself get stimulated in a way that's helpful, like go for a walk, or like relax or listen to soft music. And so this is something you're going to play with and kind of look at the patterns. And it's really just learning yourself where your brain's coming from. I had one more chart that I really liked. So here's another one. This is a little bit more from like a kid perspective, and just some things that can cause anxiety, right? Like easily bored, hyperactive and impulse, struggle to finish things. Like a lot of the stuff can happen. Again, we're looking at a lot of the stuff. Irritability, that's common in both. Forgetful, poor folks. You can forget stuff when you have anxiety because your brain's prioritizing survival mode. So you can see how much overlap there is, and that's why it's really helpful to understand where it's coming from. So then, how do we calm our anxiety down? That's the question, right? So how do we calm our anxiety down? What does that look like? What are some more things about that? And so when anxiety happens for you, what do you do to kind of bring yourself down to baseline? So we're seeing a lot of like exercise or movement, that kind of stuff. What it's doing is it's creating dopamine, and dopamine is a happy chemical. And so same thing when we say, like, in last month in our group coaching, we did the whole month theme on like motivation, how to find motivation. And what the big takeaway was, instead of saying how do I get motivated, it's how do I get dopamine? Because dopamine is the chemical that a lot of us have different variations of. And it's the thing that makes us go, it makes us calm, it makes us happy, it makes us focus. So regulating your dopamine with ADHD is probably the number one thing that you're going to practice to really get a handle on this. You'll see a couple people splashing on their face with cold water. That's going to create dopamine. This is sensory stuff. So this is so interesting. And then we got people like chewing something sour, right? Or finding a hug, touch. And so what you're seeing is we don't have a lot of people that put stuff in about think positive or change the narrative or things like that. And so this is really interesting because a lot of us are very self-aware. And so when you have anxiety, we're actually, what a lot of people are doing is so smart, we're addressing the nervous system. What we're seeing is like a lot of us are very self-aware, and with our anxiety, because we have more sensitive nervous systems and we take in more sensory stuff, thinking our way out of anxiety, especially when we have 10 times the amount of thoughts as someone with ADHD, is usually not the way to go. For us, it can be. But I used to do that. If have you tried this where you try to think your way out of anxiety and think positive, and then you just end up feeling sick and you're not better off? Like it's like, and sometimes it's systemic. So like with complex PTSD, like I have anxiety. It's not anything wrong with my thoughts. It's literally my body is feeling like that. And so what's so interesting is we see all of these comments here. I think all of these are sensory stuff. These are all body stuff. Hugging your cat, the sensory, feeling the soft sensory stuff, getting a deep hug, pressure therapy, you know, um, like, uh, like it can change, snuggle your cat, weekly yoga. Oh, that's cool. So Tyra just commented, she does Friday flow weekly yoga, and you're welcome to join. And yeah, talking to a friend, like connection. So Julie tries to talk through the thing that's giving anxiety, but it rarely works for her. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And so this is where, if you're the person that tries to talk yourself out of anxiety, I want you to look at the comments and see that maybe that's not the route. Because if that would have worked, it would have worked by now. So what are the sensory stuff that you can do to get in your body to remind yourself that it's safe to calm that down? Or maybe your anxiety is coming from ADHD and you're understimulated, or you need more dopamine. Because if you have less dopamine, you're going to feel pain more, you're going to have more anxiety, you're going to have more mood stuff, right? All that stuff's going to happen. Might have more headaches, everything. So really interesting. I didn't plan that out. And looking at that, what a fascinating kind of pattern to see. Another thing with this is stimulants. So here's an interesting, when you go into the doctor's office and people worry about caffeine or stimulants causing more anxiety, it can, or it can actually help take away the anxiety, because in our brain, the frontal lobe, and there's 4 different parts of the brain that are affected by ADHD, especially the frontal lobe, it's understimulated. And so that's where we can get anxiety, where the brain creates thoughts that create cortisol and stress that then create dopamine. So it might be that you actually need dopamine. And so, and we could be sensitive to caffeine too. But if you have a lot of anxiety, sometimes stimulants can actually make the anxiety go away if it's the source is ADHD. Or you can take a stimulant and you might have an anti-anxiety med at the same time, and that might be your perfect combo. So there's a lot of stuff that that we can look at. Now with inattentive type, so we talked about this before with ADHD. There's technically 3 types of ADHD, right? We have the hyperactive type, which is the stereotypical restless, can't sit still, always moving, right? And then we have the inattentive type, which is you take all that outside energy and instead the body's calm, right? But all that busyness is inside, and it's more often in women. Men have it too, but it's more often diagnosed as women, and diagnosed anxiety disorder. And then we have the combined type, which is a mix of both. And over 75% of us have a mix of the two. And so if you have the inattentive type, which is the one where you're more likely to just not show it on the outside, and you have all this stuff going on in the inside, you may be more likely to have anxiety. The other thing that I'll say too that can instantly help your anxiety is when you stop masking. Masking is when you cover up like your trait. So maybe you have trouble tracking time, so you're always like 15 to 20 to 30 minutes early because you're always late. Or maybe you really want to stim, right? Stim, or you want to move, you need to move, and you just stay, and you're in a training and you're like, nope, that's immature, that's not good. Like you suppress that movement, you suppress whatever your impulse is in. You're constantly doing that all day because you're an adult and you're professional. That can create a lot of anxiety because you're constantly suppressing your internal urges of your brain. And what your brain's trying to do, it's actually trying to help you regulate. So if you're someone that is in a training and you're moving your body, or you're clicking a pen, or you're fidgeting, right? Got a nice Christmas one here, a fidget toy, and you don't let yourself do that, your brain is trying to keep your brain stimulated, right? By having little stuff, because we're understimulated, it's trying to keep itself stimulated to then keep you regulated. So if you take that away and you say, hey, you can't do that, I need to sit still, I'm an adult in this training and I need to focus for 3 or 4 hours, then the brain says, okay, again, I'm going to give you a bunch of stuff that's stimulating and compelling all these thoughts that are kind of terrible and make you feel stress and create cortisol and dopamine, because somehow I have to get this part of my brain stimulated. Because if we don't do that, what happens when we're completely understimulated? Have you had that where you're just so bored out of your mind? Like you're so bored, you can't. It actually like feel it can make you feel sick. If we're like, a lot of people don't realize, like, because we get understimulated when they say, oh, I'm like sick from boredom. That's a real thing. It can be really dysregulating, and a lack of dopamine in your body makes things hurt more. Like literally, if you have a chronic illness or chronic pain, you're going to feel more pain, you're going to be depressed, you're going to have memory stuff, you're going to be like irritable and moody, you're going to have impulse control issues. Like all this stuff can happen when you mask your traits. And so by relieving anxiety, by allowing yourself, your brain to do what it wants to do, to jump from thing to thing, to fidget, to have fidget toys in class, to not suppress and try to fit into some mold, to not do some type of script that doesn't fit, don't do some lead generation activity day after day that makes you want to pull your hair out. That alone can help your brain say, hey, okay, we don't have to compensate and come up with all these thoughts that stress us out to create dopamine. And we're not masking. So unmasking can really, really help anxiety, like at a massive level, especially if you're the hyperactive type. Or I just think, depending on your environment or growing up, what was okay. If you're the hyperactive type and you need to tap your foot and you need to move, or you need to just rock back and forth, please do that. It will make a huge difference in your anxiety. The other thing is we can get overstimulated too. So, because you can Google how to calm anxiety, right? You can learn about the breathing techniques. Like, I want to give you something that you're not going to get from Google. So, if you want the kind of generic how to calm anxiety down, I know you know how to get that. I want to tell you the stuff you're not going to get. So, the other thing that can cause anxiety for us with ADHD is being overstimulated. And a lot of times, if you don't know the difference between overstimulated and just pure anxiety, you're not going to know that it might be that you don't need anxiety, which anxiety meds are helpful if you need them. I'm not against those. But it might be that you need to put in earplugs or soft music and turn off the lights and take off uncomfortable shoes or a shirt that's too tight and just give yourself a sensory break. And the anxiety is actually because the lights are too bright, your glasses are putting pressure on your forehead, your shirt's kind of scratchy and uncomfortable, your shoes are uncomfortable, you've been walking all day, right? There's noise coming through the office wall that you share, and you're just overstimulated. And that can feel like anxiety until you really sit with it and learn the difference between being overstimulated and having anxiety. And so that's another thing. When you get really anxious, an experiment you could do is, what if when you're feeling anxious, you went and you cut out all the stimulus that was going on and see if that helps. And you're not going to get that on a list on how to calm anxiety. They'll say like, go lay down in a quiet room or whatever. But we want to cut out the stimulus, because remember, with ADHD, we pick up on way more stimulus. The lights are brighter, sounds are louder, the smells are more apparent. Like all of that stuff, our brain is taking in more stimulus, and sometimes we just need a break. And a lot of us can be slightly on the autism spectrum. That's a pretty common thing. I'm on the autism spectrum, and so our sensory needs are different. So yeah, that's what I want to give to you, is like really thinking, is this anxiety, which a lot of us can have general anxiety too, it's not just from ADHD, or is this anxiety coming from ADHD? And am I creating thoughts that create stress, that create dopamine because I'm understimulated? And kind of just that awareness of when the anxiety comes up, and then treating that like systemic, right? Instead of like trying to think your way through the thoughts. If you get out and move and that helps, do that. So it might be that you go get sensory needs met, or it might be that you pull the sensory needs back. But if I were you and I was having a lot of anxiety, that's what I would play with. Besides the normal stuff, is, do I need to increase the sensory needs and give myself walking or hugs or something like soft to hold, or a dog or an animal? Or do I need to cut out all the stimulus and I need to just give my whole nervous system a break from all the stimulus? And that's what I would play with. And then figure out what works. If something works one time, add it to your toolkit.